Okay, welcome back my friends. In this video we're going to change a freezer compressor on a model 736 TCI-3, and what I'm doing here is I'm installing a line tap valve or a piercing valve onto the process port so that I can recover the refrigerant. We'll see what we pull out of there. Okay, here I'm hooking up my low side gauge to the recovery tank or the recovery system, and then I'm going to monitor the pressure in there. That's why I hooked it up to my gauge. Now I'm putting my hose connector onto my charging column here, and I'm going to use this to recover whatever refrigerant we can find in there. Make sure it's not contaminated. Usually you can tell by if it's discolored, or if it's, sometimes it smells burnt. So you open the valves on the charging column, then we'll open up the gauge and just suck out all the vapor out of the low side. Okay, so now I'm hooking up my turbo torch to my MC tank, and this is what I'll be using to sweat all my joints. Make sure it's tight. You don't want any leaks. Okay, now I'm going to take a 1/2-inch wrench and loosen the nuts that are holding the compressor down. There's 4, as you will see. You just put them to the side and get them all out. Eventually I'm going to pull this tray out because you can't get the compressor out without it. Okay, so now I'm removing the 5/16 bolts that hold that tray in place, and then I'm going to use a couple of furniture sliders underneath that tray so it doesn't scratch the floor. Okay, so now you can get to the back bolts and remove the compressor. You have to slide the tray out a little bit more, as you'll see, but because it has to clear the cabinet. Okay, so I'm going to shut off the recovery. We're way down in the vacuum. I'm going to close off my charging column valves there and disconnect that and proceed to pull out the compressor. Okay, this freezer takes 8 ounces of R134A, and it doesn't look like we pulled that much out of there. Maybe a couple of ounces. This is leading me to believe maybe there's a leak in there, and that's what caused the compressor to go bad. So we'll have to wait and see. Okay, so now I'm going to use my continuity meter, my voltmeter, to check the windings on the compressor just to confirm that my diagnosis was correct. Now normally what I do with this is I set it on sound so I can hear when the connection is made. You may not hear it in this video, but I can hear it. And then I'm going to check between the common and the run, and the common and the start. And right now I have no continuity between the common and the start winding. So the compressor is definitely bad. No question about that. So I'm just double checking to make sure, and that's it. The compressor is definitely bad. Okay, so here I'm removing the line tap valve because I can reuse that again on another job like this when we only use it for a couple of minutes. It's just to recover the refrigerant. That's the only reason. We will put a process port on here with the new compressor. Okay, so here I'm preparing my filter dryer. I'm going to cut the end off it. I'm going to use a swaging tool in there to open up it to 3/16, which is the size of the line coming out of the condenser. And then we're going to clip off the tip for the cap tube, and we're going to work our way in there and prepare the tubing and get this thing sweated up. Also, remove the Schrader valve from that access port, or it will melt when you heat the dryer up. Okay, from here I'm cutting the cable ties that are holding the two dryers. They're both marked. The one on the left is for the lower. Of course, the one on the right is for the upper section. It's a dual compressor system, so I'm going to cut that old dryer out. Okay, now it's time to prepare the new compressor. So it's pretty simple. It's the same compressor that came out. It's an Embraco compressor, a 700 BTU compressor. That's what came out. And it's a 5th horsepower. And it's 134A. So remove it from the box. Of course, the rubber feet are already on there. So you get new rubber feet. Save the box because you're going to put the old one back in there. Here's the part number, so if you can see it. Next step, I'm removing the cover on the new compressor. I'm going to slide out that overload switch there, that thermal protector. I'm going to put the cover on the side. You're going to have to pull that out anyway when you hook the new wiring in there. Okay, so the next thing to do is you remove the rubber plugs and make sure you get a little pop out of it so you know that it's charged. If you don't hear anything, it doesn't mean the compressor's bad, but the factory recommends not using it if there's no nitrogen in there. Okay, so you can use this. Now I'm preparing a new process access port here. I'm removing the Schrader valve for that, and then I'm going to prepare the copper tubing and wire brush the the line that it goes into right there in the front, the process line. You can see it, it's right in the front. Now the suction line goes in the back, and the discharge line, the smaller line, is right there. Okay, so the next thing you want to do is get a wire brush, clean the inside. The better you clean it, the better seal you're going to get with your solder or whatever you use. So now I'm removing the rubber plugs. Next, I'm hooking up a power cord to the compressor, to the run and the common, and I'm going to plug it in the wall. I want to make sure that this compressor runs before I spend all the time and energy putting it in. Because if it's a bad compressor, it won't start. You've done all that work for nothing. It's just a check that I do. Next, you want to clean the inside of the tubing and make sure the outside is clear and scrolled a little bit, or I should say scored a little bit, and then get some flux. I use silver brazing flux. And coat my process port or my access port there. And stick it in there, twist it around a little bit, get a good flow for that heat. Next, I'm going to turn on my tank. Make sure I have enough pressure. And then we're going to solder that baby in. Okay, now get a wet paper towel or a rag or something that's damp and cool down that process port there, that line, because you might wind up getting pretty bad burn if you touch it. So I always cool my joints down after I sweat them. Okay, so next I'm going to cut the discharge line and the suction line off rather than waste a lot of acetylene trying to unsweat them. Plus it's a little risky, there's wires and things under there, so you want to make sure you keep an eye on the flame. So I think it's just safer to cut it and then prepare the tubing and sweat it in when you're ready. Okay, I need to pull the tray out more because I can't get the compressor out. Unless I do, it's got to clear the cabinet. You'll see there. So I have to pull it out a little bit more. There you go. That's how you do it. Just put it aside. And then what you want to do is remove those sleeves. If they're stuck in the rubber grommets, remove the sleeves from there and put them back on the machine. That helps keep everything nice and snug. Okay, so next thing I do is I seal off the suction line and the discharge line and the process line there, because you don't want any oil leaking out of there into your truck or all over the place. So just put it back in the box, get it out of the way, put the box on the side because I'm going to use it to throw all the trash and stuff I don't need anymore back in there. Okay, now I'm going to cut out the old dryer. I'm going to just clip the lines. I'll check them once I get the dryer out of the way. Give me a little bit more room in there to work in. So I'm just checking the lines to see if they're not pinched shut. And usually the cap tube, when you cut it with those kind of cutters, they don't always do a good job. It's better to score it and then break it off. And I get a much better cut that way. And then check it and make sure it's about a 30,000th of an inch ID. It's either 28 or 30. Okay, get your tubing ready. Sand it down really well. Discharge line there, coming out of the compressor, goes into the condenser, and the suction line, which is right behind it, the 5/16 tubing. Okay, so next you want to get your compressor ready. Clean the inside of the tubing, the inside diameter, along with the outside. If you have a wire brush, that's ideal because it will score the tubing and it'll allow for the solder to bite into so it doesn't vibrate loose. Check it, make sure it's clear. Okay, so here I'm using a piece of 1/4 inch tubing as a spacer to step down. Since the condenser tubing is 3/16 of an inch and the discharge line is set up for 1/4 inch, you don't want to put the 3/16 line in there and then crimp the tubing around the compressor and solder that in. I mean, I see some people do that. I'm looking for a little neater way to do it and a more secure way. So better to step it down. There's less chance of the joint failing in the future. So just cut yourself a little piece. Could be maybe an inch long, 1.25 inches. Swage it out on one end that the 3/16 tubing is going to go into. Make that easy for you. Flux it up and you're ready to go. Okay, here I'm preparing the tubing coming out of the condenser, going into the filter dryer, and the cap tube also, which is there. Clean it up as best you can, inside and outside. And you can't clean the inside of the tip of the filter dryer because you can't get anything in there to clean it with. But at least do that in there. And be careful if you're not using a factory dryer. Some of the cheaper dryers that are out on the market, I have to admit I've used them before. The tubing is only about 40,000ths of an inch thick as opposed to 80, which is the American way, and it bends very easy, so you have to be really careful with it. Okay, time to put the compressor in. Just wiggle it in there. Get the wires out of the way. Make sure there's no wires that are stuck underneath the compressor. You want to make sure you don't create a problem in the future. So those are sit down area, nice and snug. Put your washers back on, your 4 washers and your 4 nuts. Now you want to get your discharge line and your suction line ready. You see that little spacer, that little step down I created there on the discharge line. It just makes for so much better solder joint, really. Pushed it in is at least, quarter, half inch, 5/16 of an inch again. You get it in as much as you can. It'll make a stronger joint. And then sweat it up. Okay, so here I'm disconnecting the condenser fan motor because the rear compressor, the refrigerator compressor just came on, and I don't need the wind flow of air down there will make it very difficult to solder. So now I'm heating up the joints. I'm going to solder them with my Harris Stay Still 45. And I'm just cooling down the lines here because I got to get my hands back in there to reconnect the condenser fan motor, and I just don't want to get it burned. We had enough of those. Next, I'm going to put the Schrader valves back into the access port on both the dryer and that process point there, because I'm getting ready to charge it with nitrogen, and I'm going to check for leaks. Okay, so now I'm hooking up my nitrogen tank. I'm using my high side gauge so I can measure the temperature, the pressure. I don't want to ruin my compound gauge, my low side gauge. So we open up the nitrogen tank and we're going to get about, let's see what we get in there, maybe 150, 175 PSI, which is pretty good pressure to check with. So let that stop. When the tank stops pressurizing the system, I'll know it's topped off, close off the valve, and I'll close off my nitrogen tank, and then I'll get my soap bubbles there and start checking for leaks. Check leaks on everything, not just the joints that you soldered. Check the dryer that you put in there, the joints on the dryer. You never know. I've seen it happen. Trust me. You don't want to have to go back on a job to fix a leak when you could have avoided it. So a little extra time spent on the job to do it right can save you a lot of callbacks if you're a technician. Okay, at this point I'm going to drain the nitrogen out of the system by hooking up a refrigerant hose to the access port on my filter dryer. Then I'm going to hook my compound gauge and hose up to the process port on the compressor and prepare to do a sweep charge. Next, I'm going to take a couple of wire ties, cable ties, and secure that filter dryer to the bracket, and then secure the additional filter dryer that I put on for the freezer to the tubing around the condenser area to keep it from vibrating. Okay, so here I'm hooking up the lines for the compressor. On this unit, it only had two lines on it. In and out, AC baby. So reinstall the thermal protector there, the overload, after you put the wire on it, and fish those 2 wires through that little slot on the cup, and then pop that baby on the compressor. Okay, so here I'm using a cable tie to secure the wiring to the process port. Keep it out of the way, keep it from vibrating. Just the original one was secured in the same fashion. Okay, so here I'm using a cable tie to support the filter dryer, attach it to one of the discharge lines under there. Okay, so before I started this job, I turned off and disabled the freezer compressor. By doing that, you shut the unit off, touch the warmer key for the freezer and the power key at the same time, and it will shut it off or also turn it back on. So I just turned it back on after shutting it off before I began, so the refrigerator could maintain its temperature. And now it's time to do the recharge. Okay, so now this is my 134A cylinder. I'm going to put in 8 ounces of liquid, but first I'm going to heat the tank up in the sink. Okay, we got a good vacuum. Okay, push the tray back in and button up with the 2 bolts that you pulled out. Connect the charging column to your gauge, your manifold, and open up the valves. Bleed out any air out of your hoses, and then make sure the charging column is upright. It's vapor. Don't charge the system from the below, from the when it's liquid. You smash the valves. You should know that if you're a technician. And then you can use a heat gun. I use a heat gun to warm up the tank to force the refrigerant to raise the pressure in the cylinder, which will force the Freon in as a vapor. Okay, so check your back pressure after you've gotten all the refrigerant into the system, weighed it all in. I was reading about 3 pounds back on that, which is pretty close to normal. Okay, so we're just about done here. I'm putting all my equipment away, cleaning things up. It took me about 59 minutes and 31 seconds to do this job, say an hour. That's typical. This is pretty easy to get to. So okay, so I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you on the next one.